As we looked at in the last movie, primary color correction is when you affect the entire image, basically laying down the basic foundation of the luminance values and the color grading. And secondary color correction, which we're going to look at now, is when you focus in on individual parts of the image. For the secondary color correction on this image, I want to focus on two things. I want these wrapper guys to stand out a little bit more, and I also want to de-emphasize some of these really saturated greens in the background here. So let's start by removing some of these greens, or at least toning them down. For this, I'm going to apply a second three-way color corrector effect beneath our original three-way color corrector effect. We're continuing from where we left off in the last movie. And one of the cool things about Premiere is that at the bottom of a lot of the color corrector effects, you'll find this secondary color correction area. So you can open that up and see these secondary color correction parameters. Now, what we're allowed to do here with these secondary color correction parameters is to create a mask that will make it so that whatever we do with the rest of the color correction effect, it will only affect those things that we mask off. Now, if I look at this here, this one's already adjusted, so I need to get this 3 color corrector effect, which is the one I just added, and drag this below the one that we already added. It's a little confusing, but we don't want to adjust this one because we got that one where we liked it from the last movie. Let's see, it's not working if I drag it that way, so I'll drag the other effect, and okay, now that's working there. Now the first thing I want to do is create a mask. So I'm going to change this output from composite to mask. Now, when we see white on the mask, that means that everything is affected, so there is no mask. So when we have black areas, we are protecting those areas from adjustments. So I'm going to scroll down to secondary color correction, and I'm going to open up saturation. And what I'm going to do is drag the left-hand side to the left, and what this is doing is it's masking off the most desaturated components in this footage here. And so what's left, if I keep pushing this, is only going to be the most saturated pieces. And actually, you might want to fit it with more than that. Yeah, somewhere right about there. If you want to feather the edges, you can grab the triangle and make a little bit of distance in between the square and the triangle, like that. Sometimes you have to drag it a little bit farther so that there's a little bit more room. Or if that's not working, you could adjust the start softness to manually. Sometimes for whatever reason, clicking on those triangles just doesn't work. So if you click on the value, the start softness, that'll work for you. So I move this until I'm seeing white for all of the values that I want to adjust the saturation of, and the black values are masked off, so they are unaffected. So now if we go back to the top and change the output to composite, you'll notice that we could only adjust those areas that were white in our mask. So if we adjust the brightness, even the levels, we are only messing with these areas that were acceptable to mess with, that were white in our mask. And actually what I want to do is change the tonal range from highlights, which is all I'm adjusting with these sliders here, to master. So I adjust this to master, and then I go into the input levels, and you can see that I could have a bigger impact on areas, but only the areas that we created with the mask. So it doesn't really matter what you use to make the mask, whether it's hue, saturation, or luma, in other words, brightness. Once you have that mask, you could adjust the hue, saturation, and brightness of anything. So it doesn't really matter which attribute you use to create the mask, whether it's hue, saturation, or luma, or in other words, brightness. Once you use that to create your mask, then the mask functions independent. So then you can adjust the brightness of whatever's in the mask or the saturation of whatever's in the mask, and it won't really affect the mask itself. It'll affect the stuff that's within the mask. So what I'm going to do in this case is, with my tonal range set to master, I'm going to come down here to master saturation and then take this down a little bit. And we might want to take this down considerably, actually, maybe to something really small like 15. And so we can see, if we turn this effect off and on, the before and the after. So really you don't notice it too much. Maybe this is a little bit overdone. Maybe we need to darken this a little bit here. Maybe these leaves just are a little bit too bright, a little bit too desaturated. But the point is, we want to make them not stick out. We want to make them a little bit less conspicuous. So here is the before and the after, and I think we did a really good job at that. Now, the other thing I want to do to this piece of footage in terms of secondary color correction is to emphasize these guys, bring them out a little bit more. One of the problems we have with that, though, is that Premiere doesn't really have that great of masking capabilities. So we can't exactly say, make a line around these guys and just influence these exact areas. So what I'm going to do is kind of fiddle with the system a little bit. I'm going to go to the new drop down in the project panel. I'm going to create new black video. Basically, this is just black video. That's all it is, just some black pixels. I'm going to use the same settings that I have for my sequence already and click OK and drag this to video track 2 over my current footage. Then I'm going to do a search for garbage and I'll apply an 8-point garbage matte effect. This is basically an effect that if we select it in the effect controls panel gives us 8 points that we can use to make a mask. And so what I'm going to do is basically move some of these points around until we have black area around the background. That looks pretty good. And then what I'm going to do here is I'm going to apply a Gaussian blur effect to this as well. Make sure that it's after the garbage matte. And I'm going to increase the blurriness value of the Gaussian blur so that the edges are soft. We don't have any hard edges here. And then what I'm going to do is take the opacity of the black video. Actually, we just click the stopwatch here. We just don't need to animate that at all. Take this down to something really small, something to where you can't really notice the black video very much at all. Somewhere around 20% or so. And then we have this. So we could have done the opposite and brightened up the background video a little bit, but they're already kind of grainy because of the low light situation. So our other option was then to go into the black video and darken that so it would de-emphasize the background. So there's two options. You could emphasize the foreground or de-emphasize the background. And that's what we did here. We de-emphasized the background. So here is without the black video, and here is with the black video. And we may want to bump that up to 27% or so. And we could also select the black video and move that up a little bit so that some of those feathered edges at the top kind of go off the screen a little bit, and then click away to deselect it. And so that is the before and after. There's before the black video and after the black video. Does a good job of darkening things and just kind of keeps the focus on our two guys here. Now, secondary color correction really is the bigger challenge of the two because you're constantly looking at the shadows and all the different components of your image, depending on how much time you have and the money allocated for the project, of course. But it forces you to kind of train your eye and look at the entire image and say, okay, now is everything where I want it to be? Where's the first place that my eye will focus? Here we have some highlights, and this is the first place our eye goes, and that's great, but maybe some of these other highlights are a little bit too distracting as well. So we might want to increase our black video, maybe increase the opacity or make it a little bit bigger. And you might want to focus on different shadows. Shadows are a big one, obviously. Make sure the colors of your shadows are correct. Make sure the darkness of your shadows are not too rich, but that they're dark enough. And all these different types of things that you might want to focus on to make sure that your image, the whole entire spectrum of what you're seeing, is exactly the way you want it.